So hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for today's salon. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, I guess wherever you are in the world. If we haven't met before, my name is Claire Byrne, and I'm the Community Manager for RSA US. So on behalf of the RSA US team, all of our speakers here with us today, I'd like to thank you for joining us for this month's US Salon, How to Elevate and Own Your Executive Presence. So before we get started, I'd just like to give you all a little bit of a background on the RSA US, and cover some ground rules about today's event. So in case you're not familiar with who we are, founded in the UK, we are the Royal Society for Arts, Manufactures and Commerce, and have been uniting people and ideas to resolve the challenges of our time since 1754. Today, the Society exists as an international fellowship-driven social change organisation. We are committed to a world that is resilient, rebalanced and regenerative, where everyone can fulfil their potential. Our proven change process, rigorous research, innovative ideas platforms, and unique global network of 30,000 chain makers work collectively to enable people, places, and the planet to flourish. So of the 30,000 fellows spread out around the globe, about 1,100 live and work here in the United States, including some of our speakers here today. And so RSA US exists to coordinate fellowship activities in the US with an aim towards moving the needle on addressing the inequities of our society. So before I turn things over to our moderator today, who's Alexa, unfortunately, Octavia couldn't make it. She has been struck down with COVID, unfortunately, and is in the May West. So Alexa will be taking over our moderator duties. But before I pass over to Alexa, I just wanted to cover just a couple of just like ground rules really about today's event and just how we show up in this virtual space. So a heads up that this event is being recorded, just to let you know that, and you will have access to the recording. We will be sharing that probably within about 24 to 48 hours after we finish the event. This is an informal and an inclusive space, so we really welcome thoughts, comments, questions. No question is a silly question. Feel free to pop them in the chat and we will collate them as we go. I always say, please be respectful of the tone of voice we use, the language that we use, and use language that your mother or your mum would approve of. Or as I always say in these salons, I'm Irish, so I have to say your mum, to just really get that in there, and to really bring a spirit of collaboration to this space, free from judgment or monopolizing the conversation. I think, time is our most valuable resource, so we really want to be respectful of people's time, boundaries, and feedback in this space. So as I said already, the chat is available to you to raise any questions, points of clarifications. I'll be monitoring the chat throughout the session today. You can DM me directly at the Claire or the RSA US events handle, and I'll get back to you that way. And yeah, we can collate all our questions at the end. So without further ado, I just wanted to introduce you to Alexa and tell you a little bit more about Alexa if you haven't met her before. So Alexa Clay is the director of RSA US and is the leads RSA US overseeing research, fellowship, and thought leadership across key US cities and regions on topics related to inclusive growth, universal basic income, economic democracy, the future of work, and creativity in education. She is helping to accelerate cross-city and regional collaboration and grow a distributed network of fellows for collective impact. Alexa is also a writer, public speaker, and researcher with a focus on subculture, informal economy, and new economic thinking. And I'm going to pass over to Alexa to introduce our speakers for today. So thank you for listening to me, and enjoy the rest of the conversation. Over to you, Alexa.
Thank you, Claire. So really excited to be here, and sad that Octavia wasn't able to join us, but she's invited three brilliant women here today to talk to us around the theme of executive presence. I wanted to offer some light framing, and then I'll introduce you to your speakers. Despite modest gains in representation in recent years, women, and especially women of color, are still dramatically underrepresented in corporate America. This is especially true in senior leadership. According to data from the most recent Women in the Workplace study led by McKinsey and Lean In, only 1 in 4 C-suite leaders is a woman, and only 1 in 20 is a woman of color. Whether you're looking for a new role, targeting a promotion, or striving to command the respect of your coworkers, elevating and owning your executive presence matters more than ever before. With that, I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining today's virtual salon hosted by the Gender Equity Network. Our goal is to bring people together from inside and outside of the RSA to share perspectives, discuss strategies, and forge connections. And now I'd like to start today's salon by introducing our guest speakers, Connie Steele, Jasmine Takanikos, and Ellen Bailey. First, Connie. Connie is a future of work and life expert, executive consultant, and career strategist that guides companies and leaders in understanding the voice of the changing workforce. Connie is the author of Building the Business of You, a system to align passion and growth potential through your own career mashup. Recognized by Forbes and Thrive Global, Building the Business of You landed as a top 10 Amazon bestseller. Ellen Bailey has been with Harvard Business Publishing for over 11 years and created and executed the first diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. She's also actually executed that strategy and delivered those goals for the organization. Ellen continues to drive results by serving as a catalyst to discover, develop, and deliver the best practices and resources needed to promote a culture of inclusivity at Harvard Business Publishing. Welcome, Ellen. And Jasmine. Jasmine is a global branding authority, thought leader, and educator, harnessing creativity and strategy for an integrated, inquiry-based approach to personal and brand positioning. She works with entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, creators, and businesses across all industries, including finance, lifestyle, technology, education, and architecture. In 2020, Jasmine developed BrandHuman, a principle-based methodology for exploring mind, body, and business. So I've got a number of discussion questions to kick us off, but I also want to welcome everyone in the chat to share questions or comments as they come up. We've got a terrific group today in the audience, people with their own expertise and certainly people with incredible executive presence. So kicking off, I want to just ask each of you on the panel, can you share one strategy or approach that you've successfully adopted during your career to elevate your own executive presence? Connie, maybe you can kick us off.
Sure. Well, something that I've employed, and it seems so simple, but it's the pre-meeting planning that you do, particularly for those discussions that you are leading, because it's about ensuring you have clearly defined the purpose and expected outcomes to all participants. You are setting the stage for what's to be addressed. So that is putting out that agenda that outlines the objectives, background to date, key areas to cover, obviously the action items and the next steps. But the key thing is it shows that you're taking charge of managing the discourse. And you've also thought strategically about how you want this meeting to somewhat play out ahead of time, right? So it's not just going into the meeting and saying, okay, I have these people, but how do you want to direct it? And I think another piece that's important is that the better you are at leading and facilitating these discussions to get to the right outcome, the more likely others will start to default to your leadership and managing those efforts, because you will be very strategic in how you thought about how you want to shape it, but you've also thought about who's coming to the meeting, what potential challenges there may be, what dynamics could occur. So it's almost playing out the chess moves before you get in there and laying it out so that you can get to the right outcome.
That's terrific and super helpful to think about how we can shape those outcomes and become synonymous with, driving action. Jasmine, do you want to weigh in as well?
Sure. I think about presence as just a really a simple term that we often bypass. And I think speaking for myself and what I kind of try to guide my clients towards is presence. How do you show up connected? How do you show up knowledgeable about the work, about the outcome? Presence is something you feel. It's not something you talk about. Connection to what you're doing is something you feel. So I just really try not to multitask, do a lot of things. I try to stay very connected to what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Otherwise, it's kind of a waste of time for everybody involved, right? So I just have a tremendous amount of respect for my clients, my community, and myself. So I try to kind of look at that as we're all spending our time together. How do we really practice presence? Because presence is practiced. It's not something that is necessarily innate, particularly in our society where we're asked to do a million things at once or, have our attention in a lot of different areas. So presence is something that I would highly recommend to everyone.
I think that's great to just put a pause a bit on that word presence and what does that mean and why do we struggle with presence and what is getting in the way of us being present, and certainly something that we really struggle with in modernity. I want to turn over to Ellen next. Do you want to share any strategies that you've employed or have worked for you?
Yeah, sure. And it's really to kind of build on what Connie said. So Connie, as you were sharing about being strategic about it, I think that's the key. And I think it's being mindful and thinking ahead about how you want to show up, because sometimes what we have in our head and our hearts doesn't always come out to others. And so the way that I continue to go about doing that is to not only build kind of a personal board of directors, but really leverage them, especially in key meetings prior to key meetings, like Connie said, to make sure that I am gathering diverse perspectives and getting insights and folks helping me think about the points of views and what would be important from the folks that I'm speaking with.
Yeah. One of the things that you bring up is there's a principle in BrandHuman called formal and informal advisors. And it really asks you to look at whose opinions you're taking in and where that's actually going in your work. Because we all get a lot of feedback, but you bring up a really brilliant point of intentional feedback. So when are we doing that, and how are we doing that, and how are we making time to understand our perception value?
Yeah, and I think it is gaining those perspectives, right? Like if you have people on the executive team, they're part of your personal board of directors. I haven't yet been part of the executive team, right? I'm not in the C-suite. So gaining that perspective of what's important to them, what they're thinking about, what's top of mind, knowing that going in can then impact then how I show up.
Yeah.
Agree. And I'm actually going to build on something Jasmine said when it comes to presence when you're in the meeting. So many people are yearning for a sense of belonging and connectedness with those around them, particularly, when we're in this hybrid world, or many instances, it's all like this. And so when you can truly connect with someone, look them in the eye, be empathetic, play back what they've communicated, it's almost validating their points are valid, but also connecting those dots with other people and what they've said, they will feel like you're truly listening to them, that you are being mindful and strategically connecting all the dots for them so that they feel a part of this initiative that you're running. At the end of the day, people want to feel like they're heard and that they're contributing. So if you can be present and demonstrate that you are connected to what they are saying and that there's validity in that, I think it really goes a long way.
I think that's great, and definitely want to pick up more on the topic of virtual and how we hone our presence there. I know for me, a lot of the time I'm thinking about leadership style associated with presence and where we source our leadership style. And some of you know this, but I've experimented a little bit with alter egos, nothing drastic, but just thinking about how we integrate or allow more dormant aspects of our personalities to the surface and to bubble up. And so, I think often in my 20s and early 30s, it was about harnessing a leadership style that was much more based on the pioneer, the entrepreneur, the person who was curious. And I think as, mid-career women, that leadership style has to shift. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice for women as they're thinking about inspiration for a more mature leadership style. I think so often we see leadership styles we don't want to embody or employ, or that don't feel authentic to us. And so how do you spark this desire amongst women to think about their own leadership style and to connect with what's authentic for them in terms of embracing a more maternal leadership or servant-oriented leadership, or just not having to be imitative of so much of the sort of masculine archetypes that we see within leadership? I don't have a person, but whoever feels.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I gotta tell you that this question makes me cringe just a smidgen, because I don't know that I've shifted my leadership style as I have continued to grow, right? I think that, and especially coming from Harvard Business Publishing, right? We produce HBR. Most people know HBR. You think of us as very buttoned up, very, blue suit, red tie, white shirt. We're not quite that. And I find, it goes back to the connections and being your authentic self. And people like to hear stories. People want to hear from you. I often insert humor just because that's natural to me. And I think showing up a little bit differently and not in the tweed jacket with the suede patches on the elbows is refreshing. And so I say to my recommendation and what has worked for me is to continue to be authentic. It doesn't mean you're not professional. It doesn't mean you're still not respectful. It doesn't mean that you still aren't very well prepared and show up well intended. But to let yourself come out through storytelling in particular and personal examples, I think makes a big impact, because then the people that you're talking with and that you're part of and that you're meeting with can see that you're more than just what shows up at work, and that you think through strategically, and that you connect the dots and can make points that are outside of business. So through a personal story, you're connecting the dots, which demonstrates strategic thinking in an informal way. And so I think show up and be your authentic self. Don't worry about being so formal as much as being intentional about how you show up. Use storytelling to connect dots and reveal your potential.
Fantastic. And I think, if anything, I think the pandemic and the shift to virtual just allowed us to all show up a lot more authentically, especially those behind virtual screens, because much more of our sort of personal life was spilling into work life, or at least you couldn't hide it behind the scenes as much. But curious, Connie or Jasmine, do you have any reflections on just authentic leadership styles and ways that people who are maybe struggling to connect with that can bring that more into the fore?
Yeah, I think I do relate to your question about my leadership style changing. I just want to make a correction. BrandHuman was founded about 15 years ago and incubated in the classroom at Parsons in adult learning. But through 15 years ago, in what I was doing and what I'm doing now is incredibly different. And I think that authenticity is embracing growth and understanding that, we're going to have different ways of being and talking about our work and, fumbling or doing a great job. It's all part of the process of putting yourself out there and taking a stand for what we believe in. But that doesn't mean it's without a lack of curation, right? And I think this idea of a curatorial principle in your life of how aesthetic responsibility affects others, beauty as a value proposition, color, like all of these things that affect our humanness when we show up virtually or we show up in person are incredibly important. And that for me has been a through line of when I began teaching at 27 and how I show up now at 41. So, that's, I think there's some core foundational stuff we can all look at and we can all audit about how we make others feel when we show up, which is incredibly important.
Yeah, I think that's great. And how, do you feel comfortable sharing a bit how your leadership style may have shifted?
I think that for years I was focused on the share, like what could I share about what I do and how I do it and I really share very little now. I don't find that it's a very important place in my work. I'm very focused on the client work. I don't need to talk about it a lot on social media or kind of amplify it there. And that's no judgment, right? Those are beautiful amplification places. And I've utilized them throughout my career. But where I'm at right now is the work itself is my amplification. And the people that I affect are my amplification. And I have a different view on what it means to be a market maker at this point in my life. And we all are responsible to be market makers, all of us. If we're talking about leadership, you're really talking about that you're a market maker, that you are responsible for the lanes in which you play in, to evolve those, to connect to those, to think about new ways of being, particularly right now, our own responsibility as, humans to understand what empathy is, understand what, generosity is, understand what it is to be in a room together. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful. And Connie, what would you share to someone who feels really invisible at work, or who is just kind of starting to craft what that executive presence looks like for them?
Well, I think it's always important for somebody who does feel invisible to make sure their voice is being heard, and that you have to also deliver that in a way that's authentic to you. Because what I've experienced over in my career, I think so many of you have done this too, is that, the leadership style that you might have had earlier on, for me, has evolved, one in which it's had to really be one where I've had to think about the emotional intelligence part of it even more, because there are different generations, different backgrounds, different styles that exist in the workplace, and people want to show up as themselves. And so for you as a leader to be mindful of which style can draw and can influence and enroll people is important, and you would have to adapt accordingly to make sure you connect with that person. So that's just one, to get back to your original question of how's my leadership or executive presence changed. It's one where I've had to better understand the various dynamics of people and what draws them in and what connects them and what motivates them fundamentally, because not everybody is the same. So you have to adapt accordingly. But when it comes to someone who may be more introverted or feels invisible, I think it's identifying what are the ways that you can channel your voice accordingly. So for example, in those meetings where you've got 10 boxes, 12 boxes, 15 boxes on Zoom, and everybody is talking over each other, but you've got great things to say, you realize that raising your hand and talking over everybody isn't going to be as effective. But what you could do is make sure you document those key points that people are talking about and your perspective on it. And after the meeting, summarize what they are. Here's the point that somebody made. This is my point of view. These are the implications. This is my rationale. And such that if anyone wants to reach out and discuss further, you've documented amazing insight such that people can see what you're thinking. But if you are consistently doing that after every discussion, people will start to take notice. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room, but you have shared your point of view.
I think that's great, Connie. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, like, one, and just to build on that, when you think about adjusting your style, that's exactly right. There's all of those different personality and work style assessments and all of those things. And it's actually not as much about, it's really not about understanding where you are and your style as much as understanding and being able to recognize other styles so that you can adapt. And it's not selling out, but it's really adapting in a way, and you're translating your message in a way that it can truly be heard. And so when I think about, doing that, then it takes me back to like right out of college when I was in sales. And, you're taught that people buy from people they like. And that's so true. And it's actually not enough, to be honest with you. In corporate America, it's not enough to be technically savvy because everybody is. And so how do you stand out? And one of the ways that you stand out is to really make connections with people and to be able to communicate in a way that is heard. And it doesn't always have to be verbal, to your point, Connie, which is, following up and writing, and think about the ways that best work for you and the audience that you're working with. And I use audience loosely as the people in your team and the people around you.
I just wanted to talk about a little bit this like ask of invisibility, because I think that's a really intense question. And I think that comes back to like really being an internal job. It's actually not really about, I think, all these like external tools to like make sure you get noticed. I think those can be helpful. But if you're really feeling invisible inside a team, maybe you're just like not in the right position, number one. Number two, I think that it's really important to look at value outside of structure, like outside of your job description and outside of what you're supposed to be bringing. What is your value? Have you done like a communication audit? Do you understand how you sound? Do you understand your tone? You understand how you're coming across, like how you're affecting others? Like being invisible, it's a very intense potential pain point, right? So you want to look at a lot of things that are going on there, but ultimately it comes back to you doing your own work to understand your value. And again, that value outside of structure piece is a really key piece, because it's a different time. Our jobs are changing all the time. We're constantly shifting roles. The company is constantly shifting what they want us to do and who they want it to do it for, and the client, meaning you have to understand your value has nothing to do with who you work for.
I think that's really important. And it feels like there are exercises both to understand, draw out that value vis-a-vis what we can offer. But at the same time, sometimes there's inherent bias in the cultures of business that we're a part of, or there's structural things that get in the way for people perceiving our value. And it, then the emotional labor is sort of on us to coach people into understanding that value. But I think, at a time when so many people, are fearing we're entering a recession and their layoffs, what strategies or tactics could you share for people that are trying to demonstrate that value in the workplace, and that might have a new CEO, or there might be the threat of layoffs or job insecurity? How would you instruct someone to go about demonstrating that value? Ellen, do you want to share?
Sure, absolutely. I think one of the ways is to lead with impact and results, right? And so it is all about the business. I hate to say it, but businesses are in business to make money, right? And so as we think about that, always leading with results or the impact that you've had. I also find that helpful because it's not just like, hey, I'm great, and like being uncomfortable with tooting your own horn. You're actually leading with the value that you've brought and the impact that it's had to the business. And it doesn't always have to be something grandiose. It doesn't have to be the project that I worked on brought in $1 million. It doesn't have to be that at all. It can be something very small that has had significant impact on your team, and just driving the business forward, even a learning moment.
Terrific. And Connie, in any ways in which you want to build on that?
I do. I think to Ellen's point, it's definitely about those business impacts, but I think what's also valuable is the story and that journey that led you to establishing that business at impact, because it's the approach and your how to achieve those accomplishments, not just the what, that will highlight the soft skills that you've employed, not just the hard skills, but it also provides this more macro perspective of who you are as a person, along with your character and your values. So this is really tying together, Ellen's point, but I also believe, Jasmine's point of, know who you are, your values. I mean, everyone has their unique approach to delivering something, whether you realize it or not. And so it's your how and knowing your how. So maybe the way that you're able to deliver the outcomes is in the way that you project manage something. And it's the relationships that you build and your ability to truly connect the dots across all these different stakeholders. And you do it in such a way that there's incredible unity and efficiency. So maybe that's one thing, but another person could be an amazing relationship builder, and so that aspect of them is an incredible value that helps to ensure that the outcomes have been achieved. So much of this is being able to tell that end-to-end journey of how you've been able to deliver the great accomplishment that you've done.
Fantastic, Connie. And I want to weave in a question that Caroline's asked here in the chat. Focus on increasing visibility. She's pointing out that a lot of this has to do with organizational culture. She's wondering, how important does the panel feel that success and elevating presence is bound up with working in an organization whose strategy matches our own personal values? Can anyone comment a little bit more in terms of that? Clearly when we have a disconnect between the organization that we work with and our sense of authentic mission, that can be really challenging. But is that kind of a formula for success in terms of honing executive presence?
I think it has to be. I think it's absolutely vital. Period. I think that if you're working for an organization that is against your value set, or like a lot of companies just have, you know, their values, but don't actually enact them and don't actually embody them, you're going to be, you know, fighting against something I don't think that you can win. I think that culture, again, is practiced, and it's practiced through our executive leadership. And we have a little bit of a sickness in our corporate culture of leadership, loving to talk about culture and loving to talk about inclusivity, but they don't embody it or practice it on any level. Of course, it's a business. It is about the bottom line, to Ellen's point. It always is going to be. It's really important. We understand that. Companies aren't families. We shouldn't look at them like that. We shouldn't be talking about them like that. They are businesses, right? It is our responsibility to drive a bottom line. But if we are misaligned with the value set, there's always going to be tension. That's my opinion.
And Ellen or Connie, do either of you want to come in there?
You know, I find that question really so timely. We actually have been doing some research really about understanding what workers want. And what we found in our recent study that's about to come out is that 66% of people agree, workers agree, that their personal values need to align with the corporate values. I mean, and you're certainly seeing that with the generations that are at play. I mean, those who are just entering the workforce, those who are growing in the workforce, that is so core to what they're looking for, is this alignment when it comes to the purpose of an organization and the purpose they have. People want to feel that they can deliver that impact, right? That is fueled from what they fundamentally believe. So to be able to really channel their best self and perform in an optimal way, they want to make sure that they are aligned across this front. So I agree with what Jasmine is saying. I think it is sort of a must-have now versus a nice-to-have.
I totally agree. I agree 100%. I have left organizations just on principle because we don't align values wise, right? And so I agree 100%. I do kind of challenge our thinking a bit. You know, I recently shifted in the past week and a half from the Vice President of Diversity and Culture to the Vice President of Business and Culture Transformation. And one of the reasons that we've made that shift and we've reorged a smidgen here at HPP is because what has gotten us here will not get us there. I pulled up an old video with Stedman. Does anybody remember Stedman, Oprah's partner?
Yes.
And it was a video from, like, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, like way old. And it's not in HD and it's all blurry. And he's being interviewed by somebody at Deloitte, and he just released a book, and he says, in this clip, he says, you know, diversity and inclusion is a business priority. It must be part of the strategic, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's exactly what we're saying in 2020, in 2021, in 2022, in 2023. So clearly nothing has changed from when Stedman did this video 20 years ago to where we are today. So then how can we think about things differently? And so while our colleagues are not, we don't necessarily have to think of them as family, at least in my world, I spend more time with them than I do with my family, right? I'm online 8 a.m. in the morning till 6-ish, 7 o'clock at night. That means with my husband, he gets me from 7 to 11, maybe, right? And so taking a page out of St. Marshall's book, taking a page out of Marcus Buckingham, should we lead with love in the organization? And I think, yeah, let's give it a try, because what we've been doing for the past 20 years isn't working as far as shifting the culture to where people truly, truly have a sense of belonging. And so let us lead with love. Let us think about this differently and not necessarily be afraid to say it. I think that, yeah, it's about business and it's about impact and it's about the value we bring, but not at the sake of the people. I think that we can equally address the business and the people simultaneously at the same time for a win. So as a result of all of that, we've shifted how we're looking at this business a bit.
I love that, Connie, and I think, or Ellen, and I think that at the end of the day, you know, that is really amazing and rare. And you're on a tipping point of something I have not heard, honestly, because I hear companies use the term family to bypass and incorporate a lot of toxic culture traits, and to overwork employees, and to make sure that, you know, they eat at the office, the advertising model of you have to live here and breathe here, and we're going to make it fun, but we're also going to like destroy your soul. So at the end of the day, you know, I think what you're saying is so beautiful, and I really, hearing that makes me feel so good, especially in your position, because I think you are a market maker there, and love is so key and important, and leading with love is so key and important. So thank you for that clarity, and thank you for shifting your organization and your role to meet that. I think it's beautiful.
Thank you. And we'll keep you posted. This is new as of like a week and a half ago, right?
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, but we sold the executive team and the CEO on it,
I
right?
love
Like
it.
we've got to completely shift.
Yeah, I think it's fabulous.
I mean, I think, oh, go ahead, Connie.
No, I'd love to build on the point of, you know, you lead with love, but we also look at how do we think about the workforce where it's not just about work, it's work and life.
Yeah.
People see work and life as integrated.
Yeah.
Which is why the alignment of your personal values to the company's values is
Critical.
important. We're fundamentally seeing this shift and this redefinition or sort of this evolution of our relationship with work, because you're also seeing that people want to identify the life they want to lead and are looking for work to fit into it versus the other way around. So I believe as leaders and up and coming leaders, it's important to ask your workforce, what are you looking to achieve in your life? What does success look like for you? Not just professionally, but personally. And when you can integrate those two and have a much more holistic picture of what that looks like, then you're going to be much more effective in being able to co-create an experience at work that is able to leverage the full breadth of talents your workforce has. Because when you connect with them and say, well, what's going on in your life? Or help me understand, what do you do outside of work? There are probably some amazing talent, skills, interests that you realize, hey, wait a second, I could leverage that skill and this ability into what we're doing now or what we could do. So if you can marry that personal and professional in a role within your company, you're going to get a much more engaged worker who's going to actually feel more connected to you.
Which goes back.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna go, yes, Connie, which goes back to the authenticity piece, right?
Yes.
So then you're also then showing up more authentic. So my apologies.
No, not at all.
I'm curious how we're gonna meet that, and how leaders are going to be trained to connect with that, right? Because in the pandemic, we did break the third wall, right? And we were brought in, BrandHuman, we're brought in a lot to talk about that, to figure that out, to look at those dynamics, to try to heal that, because it wasn't something that has been easy, right? So just in general, when someone brings their personal language to the table, their professional language to the table, there does need to be container around that. And I think it's important for us to think about who we are personally and what we want to share, because Kate brings up a beautiful point. Boundaries are also a form of love, right? And so we need to kind of, it isn't, I still really don't believe it's the company's responsibility to like hold all of our stuff. I really think like we need to have a differentiation between our personal and professional, although we have a holistic being in front of us and we need to like have them understand who we are, all of those things. I think it's a complex issue we're up against, actually. And people need training to understand what they want to share, why they want to share it, why they're oversharing or undersharing. This is really deep stuff that, you know, so many people are looking at right now that is really fascinating. I'm happy to provide references in the chat for people later if you're looking at different psychotherapists or neurologists that are talking about this deeply right now about, our forms of sharing. It's really fascinating.
Mhm. It is.
I think it's great. And also just a reminder, we're having this conversation at a time when we've had, the great resignation, the quiet quitting movement, when there's been, the Reddit anti-work threads are kind of out of control in terms of people's relationship with work. And so, partially, Ellen, I love the provocation around love because, it's how do we lead with love in the workplace? Which just feels so courageous. I think it feels like such a different leadership style and approach. And then also really respecting, Jasmine, your point around not getting co-opted into this narrative of the work as family and people that feel burnt out or feel betrayed by that, people that feel like they've given up so much of themselves and they haven't gotten that back. And it's kind of allowing us to renegotiate this social contract between what work is and what companies offer and what we can offer. And it feels like we're going through a huge transformation there. And maybe part of this push towards more authentic presence is around naming that, calling that, and really allowing our workplace cultures to evolve because they have been really stagnant. And the same challenges that you pointed out that existed 20 years ago are still around today. I want to bring up another question that's come through the chat, which is really around how you elevate your presence in an organization or industry that's really dominated by men. Specifically, this person asks where there's significant mansplaining in a meeting, where women are in the minority, or it just feels challenging to find your footing in such a male-dominated workplace. Does anyone have any initial reflections?
I mean, when I started my business, I was the only woman in the room almost always, right? That's a real big difference now. Things have changed, things are changing, and I do want to recognize that. I think, though, what we're talking about when we're talking about that behavior is we're talking about ego, male or female. And I think I'm of the mind it's really okay to call someone out on their behavior. I think we've gotten really afraid to just talk about things in the moment. Instead, we go back behind closed doors or cancel culture or Reddit posts, or how about in the moment trying to actually heal what's going on? When something happens to me where I feel disrespected, I'll just be like, hey, what was that question about? Like, what are we trying to get to here? Or do you not have time to work with me at this moment? You seem quite distracted. Like, again, that's the advice, what I do. I just ask what's going on. Now, in different corporate environments, this can be problematic too, right? And so I think that it's a very tough one, but continuing to respect yourself and not letting that behavior actually infiltrate you is very, very important, because that behavior has nothing to do with you.
I agree. I would say those instances in which you're dealing with a sticky and tricky situation with men who are dominating, might be demeaning you. A lot of it is challenging a bully because they don't always expect that. So the circumstance may be one in which you could challenge them with everyone in the room, but it may not be. Some of this is trying to understand those dynamics, but not letting much time pass in terms of addressing it directly one-on-one with that individual and indicating in a rational manner, this is the implication, this is why, because they're going to be on the defensive too. They probably recognize what they did. They just don't know how to deal with it. But when you are able to address that with them directly, they also realize, wait, okay, this person's not going to back down. They're not a pushover. They're going to call me out. And so it's also then diffusing the situation and you communicating to them, you want to work with them. How can you bridge? The intent is to bridge between the two of you, not to attack. They're going to come in that discussion thinking you're ready to attack. Mm-hmm. But if you can address, here is the challenge that we face. Mm-hmm. How can we work together going forward? And it is a back and forth. And what I think has been interesting, also being, one of the very few women in different circumstances and being part of a management team, what I found is that over time, many of the men came into my office to share and complain and kind of be vulnerable, which I thought was very odd. And I was wondering what was going on. And it was, they didn't see me as threatening in a way where they felt like, oh, because she is someone who could be more empathetic. And I wasn't sure how to deal with that in the beginning, but my husband realized that that's a benefit to you. Get all the intel. They can't be vulnerable to other men, but if they can share information with you, that's a valuable position to be in. Didn't recognize that whatsoever, but it is about holding your position and having that rational conversation to bridge. But at the same time, if once they start opening up to you, using that benefit of being someone who is seen to listen to your favor.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm done. Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, this is a very complicated subject because Me Too created a movement that was really important, but also didn't provide container for healing. And then actually did something that was pretty intense, which has not included a lot of women in other meetings or sidebar meetings. There's been a lot of issues with all of this, right? The male female dynamic. And I want to actually kind of take gender out of it because I know women who act like men who act like women. It's not really a gender conversation. It's a behavior conversation, and it's a conversation on ego. And it of course, gender plays in, but I think that there is some interesting things happening in the market where men's groups, men's circles are starting to really emerge. Men are learning how to communicate with other men more. We're seeing some really fascinating work there where men are stepping up to look at their communication and to look at how they come off. So I want to also say, I applaud a lot of my male colleagues that I'm seeing moving into this work of much more kind of conscious behavior. And that is a trend. We're future forecasters at BrandHuman. This is a trend that we're really seeing happen, which is really exciting and could potentially, again, create some really new dynamics in the workplace over time.
Yeah, I think you have a really good point, Jasmine. It's really not about gender. It's about being kind of bullied in a meeting, right? And
Right.
So you definitely need to advocate for yourself. I think this is also a fantastic opportunity to leverage your allies in the organization. So again, just pulling gender out of it. If you're often being talked over or mansplained, or people are repeating what you just said, but saying it differently and getting credit for it, then you definitely leverage your allies. And I think it's not only giving feedback to the person that did that, but it's also talking to other people before you go into the meeting and setting ground rules and things like that to help kind of prevent it. And it's not always you then that's having to address it.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I think that's great. Thank you all. Super, super wonderfully insightful comments. And, just thinking about the role of empathy in the workplace. And so often too, women getting that role, whether they like it or not, and seeing that as an asset, but also hearing stories, that I've heard of people burning out on that role because it's such invisible labor within the workplace. I want to just open up, we have around 10 minutes left, and see if there are any other questions in the room, or if folks want to come on camera and ask a question directly to our wonderful panel. Feel free to just jump in.
I was going to say something.
Yeah, Claire.
I'm going to spotlight myself, so I'm not just a faceless person in the room. It's kind of tangentially related to the building your executive presence, but I would just love to hear more about some of the people that you've worked with, whether they be taking gender out of the conversation, but how you have identified maybe leadership qualities or what has stood out to you in your experience in the workforce. And how you've nurtured those qualities, or you've mentored people who have been in your team, and how you have been that advocate when they've not been in the room and been that cheerleader for that person. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the qualities that you really have recognized and how you've nurtured them in people who you feel have really strong leadership potential and they may not see it in themselves? So that was a long question, but I think there's probably a lot to unpack there, and I'd love to know your thoughts or your experience around that.
So I'll jump in. I think I tackle that a couple of different ways. One, in the regular one-on-ones I have with my team, we start out by identifying the strengths, not only what your strengths are, but what your passions are and what you like to do and where do those intersect. And then we start kind of plotting and planning then, and are there any gaps we need to close, right? Regarding thinking about how you continue to progress, but that impacts what we're here today. So then with that said, then let's talk about how you show up, because it's not just about showing up so that people understand and recognize you for where you are, but they're thinking about you as far as your potential. And so when you show up and the presence that you have to be prepared for those hallway conversations. Thank you, Gorick Ing from the book Unspoken Rules. You have to have your elevator pitch ready if you bump into an executive, you know, in the lunchroom, or if you do have an opportunity to speak up in a meeting. And so I say that because it is being very mindful and intentional about how you show up, so people don't just understand and see you for where you are today, but your potential. And so that's what I coach on. That's what I continue to try to do myself as well. One piece of advice I got from a networking event was, because I am a woman and because I identify as a Black woman, every single thing that comes out of my mouth has to be strategic. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's good. Right. And so that's what I try to do. And that's also kind of how I coach, but I do it informally through storytelling and things like that. It doesn't have to be like, you know, so buttoned up.
Thanks, Ellen.
I'd say what I've done for people on my team or folks that I consult with and consult with their team, I'm always just really spotting the trends in people's behavior, actions, and styles, and threading together some powerful commonalities where I see that they deliver that impact and help make them aware of how their actions and behaviors logically lead to some beneficial outcomes of which they might not be aware of themselves. I think the hardest part is we don't always know how our own actions impact others. We don't always do the deep work to understand ourselves. I mean, self-awareness is so important, but we're always going that we don't take the time to do that self-reflection. So when you can be the one who is observing, collating, curating, connecting, analyzing, and developing insight for them to say, this is what I see you're doing. This is what can be very powerful. This is how it connects to really compelling outcomes. They then start to learn how to do it for themselves, of which they might not have before. So I just believe that if you can help do the trend spotting for your team, because you also then become better at it for doing yourself too, because you're trying to connect those dots, then they can therefore identify it for themselves, see different opportunities to apply their skills elsewhere, and you never know, they may be able to start trend spotting for you in ways to elevate your team or identify there are other people that you should connect with. But I think so much of is that kind of analysis of your people that can be helpful.
I'm going to pass on this. I think they conquered it.
Nailed it. I just want to observe how I appreciate how relational this conversation has been in terms of, you know, expecting a conversation around executive presence to focus so much on individual leadership and identity, and how much it is really focused on sort of that intersubjective piece and how we relate to others. And I think that's that, not to assign gender, but I think this would be a very different conversation if this were a room full of men. And I don't think we have any men here. So just observing that. We have one question that's coming through in terms of, can you discuss building your own table after failed attempts at trying to create a culturally diverse workplace? So someone who maybe can't find that diversity in work, but can sort of create that informally outside of their workplace, and how they can go about doing that.
I actually think,
Yeah, I think Ellen would be the best to take this.
Happy to take it. So at HPP for many years, I was the only in every meeting that I go to. I think that's still almost the case. So yes, that's my world. And so I think two things. One, never give up the good fight, right? And continue to present on why this is critical to the business continuing to excel, and how we continue to need to diversify. But yeah, for mental health and just for sanity check, need to make sure that I have a super strong personal board of directors and a network outside of work that I can go to brainstorm and just get my soul filled on a regular basis. So I think it's a yes, and don't give up on your workplace. I started this work when I was an individual contributor just a few years ago, presenting the business case to our EVP on why we needed to make this shift. I am not a DEI practitioner by trade, but yet also leveraging that personal board of directors and my outside network to help me push forward.
Beautiful.
Terrific. Thanks, Ellen. And I know there's been a question, maybe we can stop it there. We just have a moment left, but any books or resource recommendations, we can follow up in email too, if there are things that the speakers want to share or people in the audience want to share in terms of resources as we navigate, this journey. But if anything is top of mind, please do share that.
Sure.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Connie. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Jasmine, for joining in this conversation. It's been a really rich conversation, and I think something that I'll certainly take away and begin reflecting on this week, both in terms of how I lead and how we create, cultures that allow people to thrive and show up more authentically. So really appreciate your wisdom and insights. We'll do a follow-up to this so folks can find out more about your work and more about some of the resources that you can share. But thanks to our panelists, thanks to Claire for putting this together, and thanks in absentia to Octavia, who was the wonderful curator of this event. And yeah, really, really wishes she could have been here.
Yeah.
Thank
so
you.
much. Thanks,
Yeah.
RSA. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And just to say before everybody goes that I will be sending an email with follow-up links. So Connie, Ellen, and Jasmine, if you have anything you'd like to share, I can circulate that in an email for our attendees. Yeah, and also we'll have access to the recording in case anyone had to drop off or missed it. So thank you so much for your time and energy, and we look forward to being in touch again soon. And thank you for everyone for coming today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.